Okay, so yesterday I did a short video on how there's a new talk by these two authors. This is a physics professor in Australia whom I've talked to. He's also a classical pianist. And Harold Ottmansbacher is a neuropsychologist, I think, is his technical training. He's in Switzerland. He's a Jungian analyst. I don't know if that makes him a neuropsychologist. But so they're talking about non-Boolean quantum logic as a explanation for quantum synchronicity, and from Jung's work with Wolfgang Pauli and David Bohm's work with Basil J. Hiley, and then John Wheeler and Eddington. Now, the only other scientist I know who makes the same connection between non-commutativity and quantum non-Boolean logic is the physicist Eddie Oceans. And so this is the only book chapter that he had published. It's in this book from the Mental Research Institute, which was connected to Stanford. And he also worked at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center on what he called quantum psychology. So basically he was building on the work of Gregory Bateson, and so I just want to point out that he's talking about the same non-Boolean logic and how it's solved by non-commutativity. So here I have done the I've actually marked up the book, which normally you would not want to do, but just makes it easier to find everything. So since all quantum interactions take place through the property of not being commutative, I had come to the Mental Research Institute from New York to discuss this issue. So his whole basis was this non-commutativity as a means of explaining logical paradoxes that are found in psychology, and it's a way of both explaining the problem and solving the problem at the same time. And so I hope to induce a physical logic of psychological processes that could clarify the psychological disputes. At the same time be identifiable with actual physical events. So he actually did say, it'd be cool if we could study the brain to find this in the brain, this non-commutativity. But then he argued, of course, that the Wing Chun that Eddie Oceans taught is an example of the non-commutativity as Neigong or internal martial arts. So the ambiguity of non-commutativity is a fundamental principle of mind-body integration. And so here he's talking about non-locality as found in the Stern-Gerlach experiment. And then he says the capacity to form negation is a precondition for consciousness. So basically, this is the left brain dominance as logical inference. So what you're doing with the left brain is you're in meditation. What's called vichara is you literally repeat the I thought over and over to logically investigate the source of the I thought. And this is also called neti, or neither this nor that. And that's what the quantum logic is. It's neither A nor not A. And that's what makes it the quantum logic, because you have that double negation that's then a dialectical reversal of the void. And this is something I've been studying in psychology. You can find it in Lacanian analysis, and from Zizek, Slavoj Zizek, but he's still stuck in the wrong physics in Platonic physics, because he hasn't really studied quantum physics on a deep enough level. And so one of the quantum features of quantum psychology, so this is what he calls it, and so so you can see here, this is a direct parallel to this follow-up. What I would call this like a follow-up book, because they don't know about Eddie Oceans at all, except for the fact that I emailed them to tell them about Eddie Oceans. But this is exactly the same argument that Eddie Oceans was making back in this is like from the 80s, this book. Let's see what year this is. Oh, 1995. So okay, if B lies within the future light cone of A, which places a bound on the speed by which material information can travel. Okay, so this is where we get into the non-locality that ties into relativity. So more on quantum psychology. So he gets into the quantum logic right here. So yeah, it's interesting, very interesting. So this is the neither A nor not A. And so then he gets into like psychoanalysis based on this quantum logic. And now he's actually getting into the physics of the non-locality. And what's cool about Eddie Oceans is he actually cites my own quantum physics professor, Bernstein. I wonder if he does that in this book chapter. I should see. So he's got a lot on Gregory Bateson, because he was building on. I know I studied Gregory Bateson my first year of college. One of my music teachers actually gave me Gregory Bateson's book, Mind and Nature. Here it is right here. So that's what I studied in my first year of college. I just studied it on my own, not for any class. But ironically, the teaching assistant of my physics professor was reading the same book at the same time. I never talked to him about it, but I just noticed, and that's quite a coincidence. And okay, so this is all the sources of any oceans. Or no, is this for the whole book or just a book chapter? I think this is the whole book. Anyway, moving right along. So then the other day I was studying Yakir Aronoff, who worked with David Bohm also, and this is I was looking up to see if he discussed realism, because the standard explanation of non-locality in quantum physics is that the Bell inequality proved that the foundation of reality is either non-local or it's non-real. It's not real. And Aronoff, he relies on the Bohmian physics model to explain, but he doesn't get into non-commutativity as much. Like if you look in the index, there's no non-commutativity listed. But here I just noticed this, when h bar does not equal 0, the conjugate variables do not commute, but the modular momentum variables are well defined, and measures of modular variables exhibit quantum non-locality, part of the quantum world that other measurements miss. So this is the key non-commutativity. So if you can just maintain this h bar not equaling 0, then you do not reach the classical limit, and you maintain the non-commutativity into the quantum scale. So what do we mean by h bar? You can think of Planck's constant as the average energy of light, and then you can think of h bar as the 720 degree spin. Now normally light would be just have a spin of 1, but and then the half spin would be the 360 degrees of the electron or neutron or proton. But due to relativity, based on the Bohmian physics, we realize that the photon actually has gravitational mass from this 1/2 spin of matter, of particles. And another way to say this is that matter itself is actually made up of photons, but due to the gravitational mass of the photons, you have this non-local non-commutativity as a negative frequency of the photon. That's a virtual photon. And so this is what he's hinting at when he says this non-commutativity does not commute, but and it exhibits quantum non-locality. And so this is a new type of force. It's a novel force that Basil J. highly focuses on, and so for Yakir Aronoff, he doesn't focus on the non-commutativity. So you have to come at it from, in this book, he talks about like the weak measurements, and that's how he gets into this new type of force. And what he's saying is that the future changes the past, and so you have this the non-locality is in time. It's in pure time. So the question arises is, does this mean that the non-locality is non-real? It's not real. And in standard quantum physics, they would say yes, that the you can have non-locality, but it's not real because it doesn't violate the principle of primitive causality in relativity, which basically says that time is a linear operator and you move from the past to the future to have primitive causality, or else you could have the future changing the past. And so this is what he talks about in terms of non-locality. He says that causality is never violated. And so what I'm trying to point out is that in terms of quantum biology, that's no longer true. And that's what this book gets into, is that he says that he points out, for example, that Alain Kahn, the Fields Medal math professor Alain Kahn, actually argued for the Jungian synchronicity being real, existing, that you could have these paranormal realities. So 142 and 173. 142. Okay, so right here we have Kahn was awarded the Fields Medal for his work on non-commutative algebras of operators. Later, he laid the foundations of non-commutative geometry. In an open and heated discussion at a conference on Wolfgang Pauli in 2007, he defended fiercely that Jungian synchronicity is an all-important feature of reality. So that means the paranormal. That is the paranormal. Now, Eddie Oceans also believed in the paranormal because he said that the Neigong of internal martial arts, which is the paranormal, is explained by non-commutativity. And so when Eddie Oceans was working at Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, the director of theoretical physics who he hired Eddie Oceans, and he also said that the paranormal should be investigated as a legitimate phenomenon in physics. This was Noyes. His last name was Noyes, and he was I think his first name was HP. He went by HP, but I think it was like Henry Pierre or something like that. Let's see if he's in the index. I doubt it, because he's just a straight up physicist. He's not a psychologist or psychiatrist or whatever. Psychoanalysis. Okay, so there it is. Right. Okay, so now I've mentioned 3 books. Now here, this brings us to Jean Brimond, who he has a lot on realism in this book, because he also is promoting the de Broglie-Bohmian model of reality. And I've corresponded with Professor Jean Brimond several times. In fact, he sent me his lecture that he did at NYU in the Philosophy of Science department for Tim Maudlin on the Bell inequality. And his whole point is that the Bell inequality, it disproved quantum field theory, because quantum field theory is still assuming relativity as the foundation of reality, with this, there's no violation of primitive causality. But Jean Bremont, he points out that in fact there is spooky action at a distance in the quantum non-locality. And normally this idea of spooky, like Einstein, was disproven. It's well known now that Einstein was disproven by Bell's inequality. And my own quantum physics professor, Herbert J. Bernstein, he has a recent article where he says that Einstein assumed that you had to use statistics, you had to have a statistical understanding of quantum physics. But Bernstein says, this is not true, because you can do quantum physics with just one particle that's entangled, and that's what the weak measurements are doing also. And so you're able to show this deeper level of reality by using entangled photons, and then again, the quantum non-locality exists in time as pure time. And so what the Jean Bremont, he doesn't get into the non-commutativity at all, but he does talk about realism, and he says, like, look, he's like, look, just because quantum physics is non-local, that doesn't mean it's not real. And so because he subscribes to the de Broglie-Bohmian understanding of reality, it's realistic, because the non-locality is based on time. And so you can logically infer that the future is affecting the past as spooky action at a distance from the quantum non-locality. And even though technically it's only a correlation, you can still use that non-locality for quantum teleportation and quantum computing. He gets into this, and quantum cryptography. So this is what my own quantum physics professor Herbert J. Bernstein then developed. He had worked with Alan Aspect before, or I don't know if it was Aspect or if it was another similar guy. Can't remember his name, but I think it was Alan Aspect though. But at any rate, so Herbert J. Bernstein, he uses this, he calls it the quantum donut, but the donut model is non-commutativity. And he's using this whole idea of the 1/2 spin with the 720 degrees as another aspect of information in the non-locality. And when you're utilizing the non-commutativity as the non-locality, then you have what he calls super dense quantum information, and that's then used for the cryptography and the teleportation. And it's superluminal. It's a non-local correlation that then is able to maintain the cryptography in quantum teleportation and so that's the whole point of the use of the quantum teleportation signals, because you still have to use a classical signal to activate it, but the actual information is contained in the non-commutativity. Okay, so what's interesting about Jean Brumon is then he completely rejects any kind of paranormal understanding of quantum physics. But that's because he's not focusing on the biology of because one of the big errors in quantum physics is that they tried to tie the observation process of measurement as an actual physical observation by the scientist. And so Jean Brumon, he quotes these other scientists making this error, like John Wheeler and Bernard d'Espinal. Bernard d'Espinal's book Behind the Veil, which is an excellent book, but it's just that Jean Brumon's point is like the Bohmian model is not limited to the actual observation by the scientists themselves. It's not. So even though you have this interaction between the environment and the measurement process in quantum physics, you are not dependent on an actual scientist doing the measurement. This is, Basil J. Hiley's emphasis as well, is that this non-commutative non-locality is just happening on its own, whether humans exist or not. But at the same time, it is a spooky action at a distance that is a superluminal correlation. A less radical position than the ones of d'Espinal, Wheeler, Zeilinger. That's the guy I was trying to think of, who worked with my own physics professor. And Merman is to claim that what happens on the micro scale is unknowable, and that only the macroscopic manifestations of what happens on that scale can be known. Okay, so what is different in quantum biology is that we're saying that it is possible to get information that's precognitive and essentially inherently precognitive. And this was first argued by Olivier Costa de Beauregard. But what makes non-commutativity different is that it's not limited to the micro scale. And so Costa de Beauregard, he was still relying on relativity and the principle of invariance to argue for this inherent retroactive signal. And that's what Roger Penrose also is relying on, is a retroactive signal from the future. But that's the difference between superluminal and retroactive, because the retroactive would be a relativistic analysis. And you get the same with the transactional model that Ruth Kastner proposes. But by understanding the non-commutativity from the quantum transition frequencies of Heisenberg, then again, that the non-commutativity is not limited to the quantum micro scale. And so you're able to have this resonance to the macro scale. And that's what happens through meditation. And the difference is that you're relying on logical inference as sound, as from the basis of thinking, from the source of sound as listening, the listening process in quantum biology. And this gets you to go beyond time frequency uncertainty, as explained by Alon Khan in music theory. The truth of music is actually the non-commutativity as non-locality. And how this works in biology is because of the listening process then it actually resonates into ultrasound and infrasound. And the ultrasound resonates the microtubules in the brain, which then have a quantum coherence through the tubulin. And the tubulin then rely on a superradiance acoustic phonon that's non-local. So you get this superluminal signal through the tubulin. But then when you realize, because it's superradiance, you are working as an exchange with the photons directly. And if all matter is actually made of light through the photons, then the superradiance is actually inherent to the time frequency itself of the photons as being non-commutative. So this is what Alon Khan is explaining when he says this is how our brains work. This is the source of our thinking in our brains. And so most physicists, most scientists, they don't focus on non-commutativity at all, because since the language of science is mathematics, they've been trained in commutative geometry, because as Alon Khan points out, all of science is based on commutative geometry. And so, for example, Roger Penrose, he published a paper that he co-authored saying that the foundation of reality is non-commutativity in his palatial twister model. But then he also admits in his talks that he's not good at the non-commutative math, and he finds it strange and a nuisance. And that's what Alon Khan also says, is that the scientists find non-commutativity to be strange and a nuisance. And so in commutative geometry, you're assuming there's a one-to-one correspondence between number and geometry as a symbol for the algebraic geometry that's been in place ever since Euclid and Plato. But then, of course, it was rediscovered in Europe based on the Islamic influence in the 9th century, and so the problem being that when you get into the 5th dimension in the mathematics, you're forced to use non-commutativity again. And so most scientists assume that non-commutativity is actually just a byproduct of the complex numbers that themselves are commutative. But when you realize that the number I, as the imaginary number, the square root of -1, is actually this logical process of time as an iteration, and that's what Eddie Oceans gets into. And so you can think of it as the iteration of x equals -1 divided by x, and that process of x equals -1 divided by x then causes an ambiguity whenever you have an external measurement, because it takes time to do the actual mathematics. And so the measurement itself inherently has this non-commutativity that is an asymmetric time shift. And this is what Lou Kaufman explains as well, and he worked with Eddie Oceans. So basically, instead of understanding non-commutativity as an extension of complex numbers, Lou Kaufman emphasizes that actually non-commutativity is more fundamental. And this is also what Alan Kahn points out as well, and so does Basil J. Hiley. And so you have this more fundamental process of time and frequency. And so the foundation reality is actually inverse frequency. Normally, you think of wavelength as the basis of magnitude for time, so you have an inverse wavelength. But if you realize that, as Louis de Broglie pointed out, the momentum in quantum physics is directly proportional to the frequency, and so the momentum is inverse to the wavelength of matter, but the time, the time is inverse to the wavelength, and then the momentum is inverse to the frequency. And so that's the basis of the non-commutativity, because you have this a non-local exchange between external and internal reality in that's then rediscovered in this psychoanalysis of physics. So basically, when you say that that the momentum is inverse to frequency is inverse to I got that turned around. It's the momentum is inverse to wavelength as time is inverse to frequency. So when you're relying on the music in quantum biology through a process of listening, then you're able to convert the wavelength back into pure pure time itself. So you have the time as inverse frequency, and then the frequency being non-local and non-commutative. And this is what Basil J. Hiley then calls a new quality of energy. It's a new type of force that's non-local, and it's active information from the future. And it exists before linear time exists. So it exists before space-time. So it's both realistic and non-local at the same time. And normally the Bohmian model is rejected because it's considered to be a non-local model that tries to rely on hidden variables. But as Basil J. Hiley explains, David Bohm, he always regretted using that term hidden variable. And in fact, there's nothing hidden about it, because all you're doing is analyzing the mathematics directly. And so hidden, if you just, all you have to do is look at the Schrodinger wave function to realize that when you convert it to the polar coordinates for the time, then the non-commutativity it's within the equation already. It just got ignored because it was in a different form, a different mathematical form. And of course, this was the original difference between Heisenberg and Schrodinger originally in quantum physics, is that they argued, well, they're equivalent, but the problem is that Schrodinger covered up the non-commutativity, And this happened with Planck himself when he created the Planck constant. And that's something that Juliana Mortensen points out. Juliana Mortensen Brooks. And so normally we think of non-commutativity in the context of quantum uncertainty. And so the typical physicists, like when I debated Jack Sarfati, he just said, well, that's non-commutativity, it's just quantum uncertainty. But if you study this book here, they point out that actually you can have non-locality without any connection to quantum uncertainty. And so that's the case in non-commutativity, is that, as Basil J. Hiley emphasizes, that the non-locality is not quantum uncertainty. And it's because of non-commutativity. So the non-commutativity exists on a deeper level of the before the uncertainty measurement comes up. It already exists as the foundation of reality that's non-local before there's any kind of measurement uncertainty. So what Hiley is pointing out is that if you look at these early physicists in quantum, even before quantum physics, they considered the algebra to be the actual language of time itself. And so when you get this non-commutative algebra, what he's arguing is that is a type of active information itself that is it's what explains the dynamic at the foundation of reality that also creates this new type of active information that's organizing reality. And so it looks like it's random, but it's not random. And this is also the point of Alon Khan and also Roger Penrose, is they both say that it appears to be random, but it's actually not random. And so the whole point in quantum biology is that you can access this inherently precognitive paranormal force that exists through meditation because of this secret of music theory. When you understand music theory as listening to this active information from the future, then it's not dependent on a materialistic external measurement. And when you're no longer dependent on an external materialistic measurement, then you're able to resonate with this active information from the future. And you're able to also then store up that energy as a quantum negentropy. And then because it's activated through light, through the invariance of the speed of light, then you have this difference between your own internal reality and external reality that you interact with at the speed of light. And that's how the holographic healing occurs through this undivided non-locality as active information from the future. So as they point out here, and Basil J. Halley makes this same point, is that this information is different than information normally defined in physics. I didn't know they talked about Goethe. It's cool. Okay, so so basically this book is the main promotion of Basil J. Halley's work outside of his own research papers, as well as collaboration with other scientists. And so here's Spacker talking about non-commutativity in terms of, he did a study on meditation with showing that, I think it was meditation showing monks could maintain this Necker cube bistable perception being non-commutative as an example of quantum coherence. So the secret of what I call sound current non-dualism is that when you're relying on listening, then you're able to bypass this ambiguity, and you're directly resonating with the precognition itself as a listening process. And this is what Ramana Maharshi called Muna Samadhi, as the highest level of Samadhi, which translates as silence Samadhi. And so basically, in terms of the psychological analysis of Eddie Ocean's, what you have basically is when he's saying this ability to say no as the origin of consciousness, what's happening then is you have an inhibition of the thinking process, and by saying no, and then you're able to then focus on the right brain frequency of musical listening, and so when you have that right brain dominance of musical listening, then based on frequency, then you're able to have this non-commutative superluminal resonance. And so I recently, I think it was just yesterday or the day before, I discovered a new research article by a neuroscientist who also studied Buddhist chanting, Buddhist meditation in, I think it was in Italy, or his home country. And so what he's been researching is that the microtubules can actually, the tubulin can actually hear. There's a protein in the tubulin that picks up the sound vibrations and then activates the tubulin directly through the chanting process. And so he's proven that by chanting, you're directly engaging this tubulin quantum coherence information. So I sent him an email discussing my own research on how, if you look, there was a guy, Larry Domash, and I have his book here actually. Okay, I don't know where it is. But anyway, he argued that he was part of the transcendental meditation research, and his argument was that when you do the mantra, that it empties out the left side of the brain, the thinking part of the brain, and so the mantra is like tying up the monkey mind, what they call in meditation the monkey mind, which is your thinking process. And so when you repeat the mantra, it's sort of like you're distracting the monkey mind. You're giving it something to do, and that's another form of inhibition. And you're basically saying no to the monkey mind by, it's like throwing the dog a bone, and that then opens up the ability for the right side of the brain to become dominant through the frequency. And then through the frequency, then you get this, what Larry Domash said was the non-commutative 1/2 spin opening up as this quantum potential energy, this new type of force. And so what Eddie Oceans argues is that that new type of force of non-commutativity actually goes into the macro scale through Neigong. And this is what you find if you study Neigong as Taoist alchemy. The whole body, the whole mind body has this non-commutative, or what I used to call complementary opposites. And so the complementary opposites in Neigong, what Eddie Oceans taught is, you have to study the traditional Chinese medicine, but the whole body is sort of like has these holographic layers of the yin and yang energy channels. And then you find this same philosophy in India as the 3 gunas of no guna. So you have the sattva, rajas, and tamas as the 3 gunas. And so what my own research argues is that those are equivalent to Taoism through this music theory connection, when you realize that they originate from the truth of music as non-commutativity, and that language itself arises out of this non-commutative music truth. So then you can focus on the Taoist alchemy is one example, but it's probably the most prominent example because they didn't they didn't get colonized by Western genocidal, Platonic philosophy moving in. That happened in India through the British, and earlier through Islam, which was based on Platonic philosophy as well. And so here he mentions deep ecology, and this is what I got into in my master's thesis on radical ecology. Arnie Nice, yeah. I was reading Arnie Nice in starting in Madison in the early 90s. Actually, my dad got me Arnie Nice's book. And here they quote Gregory Bateson again, so that's almost quoting Oceans. It's pretty close. So the big point of my video this morning is just to say that the de Broglie-Bohmian model, being non-commutative, actually is both realistic and non-local at the same time. But in standard quantum physics, they consider Bell's inequality proving non-locality and disproving Einstein to mean that reality is either non-local or non-real. And what I'm claiming is that, and this is what Jean Bremond claims as well, is that science is based on reality, that you need this realism as the foundation of reality, or else you can have serious problems. But at the same time, Jean Bremond, he rejects any kind of paranormal reality. Whereas these guys, they accept the possibility of a paranormal reality, the Jungian synchronicities, based on non-commutativity as the truth of the Bohmian physics. And that was also what Eddie Oceans realized when he was quoting my own quantum physics professor, Herbert J. Bernstein. And then, as I pointed out, if you understand when the Planck's constant, the reduced Planck's constant is not equal to zero, that's when you have the non-commutativity as a process of active information from the future that's realistic and non-local. And this is demonstrated in the weak measurement experiments that Yakir Aronov's research group did using entangled photons. And that's what's happening in the meditation process. That's the secret of Negong as alchemy, is what Eddie Oceans argued through the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center. So this is a very radical view analysis that you need quantum biology to understand, and that happens through quantum psychology. That was first created by Eddie Oceans, and then it's been taken up by Harold Ottmansbacher and Harold Ottmansbacher and Dean Rickles.